The wind slammed against Maddie Harper's tiny Wyoming cabin, making the windows rattle in their frames like bones in the cold. The blizzard outside wasn't just a snowstorm. It was a living thing, wild and furious, howling through the trees and swallowing up the little town in its path. Power flickered. Shadows danced across the old pine floor. Maddie stood by the stove, the orange glow casting her features in sharp relief, trying to calm her racing heart with the steady ritual of pouring tea. But then, Ranger moved. The German shepherd, usually silent and calm, leapt to his feet so suddenly the mug slipped from Maddie's hand and shattered. He barked, deep and frantic, body tense, hackles raised. He darted to the door, eyes fixed, every muscle screaming urgency. Maddie's breath hitched. It was the kind of night she never left the house. Too many ghosts in the darkness, too much memory. But Ranger looked at her, straight through her, the way only he could. His tail thudded, then he barked again, sharper, like a command. She hesitated. Her mind swam with the familiar cold. Memories of battlefield tents, of doors she couldn't open, of her own fear pressing in like the snow. She wanted to turn away, to lock the world outside. But Ranger growled, pawing at the handle, making a sound she'd never heard from him before. Maddie swallowed. She reached for her boots. Okay, let's go, she muttered, trying to sound brave. The storm nearly knocked her off her feet the moment she stepped outside. The snow was up to her knees, the wind so cold it burned. Ranger pressed close, his body heat a silent promise. He led her, not toward the road, but across the frozen yard, past the fence, toward the old playground at the edge of the empty town. Maddie's flashlight barely cut through the swirling white, but Ranger moved with purpose, nose low, barking into the dark. She saw it then, a mound of snow, almost invisible, barely a shape under the swings. Something was wrong. Maddie stumbled forward, adrenaline drowning out her fear. As she reached the playground, her hands numb and clumsy, she saw a small figure buried in the drift. A child, lips blue, trembling, barely conscious. Ranger circled, barking furiously now, pushing his nose into the snow, uncovering her face. Maddie's hands shook as she brushed the snow from the girl's cheeks. The world narrowed to the sound of her own pulse thundering in her ears. She lifted the girl, so light, so cold, feeling her own panic claw at her throat. She wasn't strong enough for this. She couldn't do this again. But Ranger was there, pressing his body against her legs, urging her on. Step by step, Maddie staggered through the storm, heart pounding, the girl's head lolling against her shoulder. Ranger barked at the darkness, circling protectively, never leaving her side. Maddie's boots slipped. She nearly fell, catching herself on a branch, whispering desperate prayers into the wind. The lights of the cabin flickered in the distance, so far, too far. Inside, warmth exploded over them. Maddie barely managed to lay the girl, Chloe, she'd later learn, on the old quilt in front of the fire. She stripped off Chloe's frozen coat, her own breath clouding in the air. Ranger stood over the child, growling low, as if daring the night to try anything more. Maddie's trembling hands found the girl's wrist, weak pulse but alive. She started to cry, silent tears of fear and relief, knowing the storm was just beginning. Ranger nudged her, eyes bright with something like hope, and Maddie realized she wasn't alone, not anymore. The cabin glowed with the crackle of fire, Chloe shivering under a pile of blankets, Maddie kneeling beside her, and Ranger standing guard. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, 3 broken souls held on to each other, refusing to be swept away. The cabin's old walls groaned against the wind as Maddie moved with brisk urgency. Chloe lay before the fire, shivering violently, her skin pale and lips tinged with blue. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the fight had shifted. Now it was Maddie against the cold that had sunk its claws deep into this girl's tiny body. Ranger paced the floor, whining, unable to settle. Maddie stripped off Chloe's soaked jacket and boots, working by muscle memory, her mind flicking through every protocol she'd learned as a combat medic, but the panic at the edges of her vision threatened to paralyze her. Blankets, Maddie told herself. She grabbed every one she owned, threadbare, mismatched, some still faintly smelling of cedar. She piled them over Chloe, then dashed to the stove to heat water for bottles. The kettle screamed. Maddie winced, flashes of the battlefield coming back unbidden. Alarms, screaming, chaos. She blinked hard, steadying herself, forcing her shaking hands to pour the hot water into 2 bottles and tuck them under Chloe's arms and at her feet. Ranger pressed his nose to Chloe's hand, whining softly, refusing to move from her side. The dog's gaze flicked from Maddie to the child and back, as if pleading for some miracle. Maddie knelt down beside them, watching Chloe's chest rise and fall, each breath a battle. Ranger's head rested gently on Chloe's lap. Maddie couldn't tell who needed comfort more, her or the child. "Come on, Chloe, stay with me," Maddie whispered, voice hoarse. Minutes stretched and twisted, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional gust rattling the window panes. Maddie kept checking Chloe's pulse and breathing, gently rubbing her arms to coax warmth back into her. Ranger licked Chloe's cheek, a gentle nudge, his way of saying, "I'm here, you're not alone." As Maddie reached for a fresh towel, her hand brushed something clutched tightly in Chloe's grasp. She pried it loose, expecting a toy or mitten, but instead found a battered notebook, pages warped from the snow. Maddie glanced at Chloe. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. Curiosity prickled through Maddie's exhaustion. She flipped through the notebook. Childish drawings, hastily scrawled in crayon and pen, filled the pages: a girl in a dark room, a looming figure with a twisted mouth, storms, and a woman screaming. There was fear in every line, shadows, broken toys, words written in jagged block letters. "Don't let them find me." Maddie's gut twisted. On the back page, a hasty sketch, a woman with a kind face and a dog beside her. Ranger whined, sensing Maddie's shift in mood. The story was here, between these pages, but not all of it. Maddie glanced at Chloe again. The girl's features were soft now, slack with exhaustion, but as the firelight danced across her face, Maddie saw a familiarity she couldn't shake. Her late sister's eyes, the same worried brow, the same stubborn chin. A knock at the door startled her. Just the wind, she told herself, heart hammering. She resisted the urge to call for help, torn between the instinct to protect and the fear of what outside involvement might bring. Maddie hesitated. Her training screamed, "Contact the authorities!" But her gut rebelled. Chloe was still so fragile, so lost. Would they take her away, send her back to the people who'd let this happen? Maddie's resolve hardened. Not yet. She'd wait until Chloe was stronger. She'd protect her, no matter the consequences. The hours crawled by. Chloe slept, fitful and murmuring. Maddie drifted between tending to her and pacing the small space, battling old memories that clawed at her from the corners of the room. Each time Chloe whimpered, Ranger would press closer, sometimes gently licking her hand, sometimes just resting his massive head across her shins like a living, breathing shield. At dawn, the storm finally began to wane, the first gray light seeping in through frost-streaked windows. Maddie finally let herself collapse onto the couch, exhaustion washing over her in waves. But she couldn't take her eyes off the girl and the dog. In that moment, it struck her. She was terrified, yes, but she wasn't helpless. She had a mission again, and that was enough to keep her upright. A weak sound broke the silence. Chloe's eyelids fluttered, then opened. Fear flashed across her face as she looked around, disoriented. She started to sit up, panic rising. "Hey, it's okay," Maddie said softly, staying back, her hands open and empty. She gestured to Ranger. "You're safe. He found you. We brought you here." Chloe stared at Ranger, then at Maddie. She bit her lip, eyes brimming with silent questions. Maddie took a step back, letting Ranger make the first move. The dog nudged closer, tail thumping softly. Hesitantly, Chloe's small hand reached out, fingers digging into Ranger's thick fur. She clung to him as if he were a life raft. Maddie's breath caught in her throat as she watched this silent exchange. It was Ranger who broke the barrier, not her. The dog pressed his nose against Chloe's cheek and finally, Chloe let herself cry, soundless, shuddering tears. Maddie knelt, close but not too close. "You're safe here, I promise," Maddie whispered, voice raw. The words weren't just for Chloe, they were for herself too. The storm had passed, but Maddie knew that the real battle had only begun. She sat beside the fire, knees tucked to her chest, Ranger curled up protectively around Chloe. As the morning sun crept over the snowdrifts, Maddie dared to hope, for the first time in years, that she could keep her promise. The storm had spent itself by the time morning truly arrived, leaving a heavy silence across the landscape. The world outside was blanketed in white, trees drooping under the burden of new snow, but inside the cabin, everything felt changed. Maddie sat in a battered old armchair, one leg tucked up, watching the flickering fire while Ranger dozed beside her, ears twitching, never fully at rest. The only sound was Chloe's slow, unsteady breathing as she lay curled in a nest of blankets, face pale and pinched but warm now, color returning to her cheeks. A lull had settled, tense, almost brittle, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Maddie picked up the battered notebook she'd taken from Chloe's hand the night before. She ran her thumb along the water-stained cover, tracing the warped edges, heart pounding. Part of her wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen the things inside, but she couldn't. She flipped through the pages again, stopping at the jagged drawings, her eyes catching on one in particular. A little girl in the corner of a room, huge eyes, knees drawn to her chest, the words, "Don't let them find me," scrawled above her head. Maddie's chest tightened. Guilt flooded her. Memories of her own fractured childhood. The fights with her sister. The way she'd always run away from hard things. She remembered the last argument. Sharp words left hanging between them. And the years they'd lost. The phone calls she never returned. She saw her sister's face superimposed over Chloe's. The same fear. The same desperate need for safety. The hours passed slowly, punctuated by small, gentle sounds. The crackle of fire, the hush of wind against the window, Ranger's occasional sigh. Maddie made tea and sat cross-legged by the hearth, trying to calm her racing mind. She watched Chloe's sleeping face, every so often checking her temperature, the girl never stirring, only whimpering softly in dreams. Ranger watched too. Every time Chloe shifted or whimpered, his ear flicked, head lifting, eyes alert. If Maddie moved too close, Chloe tensed, drawing herself deeper into the blankets. Maddie understood. She backed off, giving Chloe space, letting the dog be the bridge between them. Sometime around noon, Chloe woke with a start, eyes wide and panicked. She sat bolt upright, heart hammering so loudly Maddie could see the pulse in her neck. Her gaze darted around the room, landing on Maddie, then the door, then back again. Maddie didn't move. She kept her hands on her knees, her posture loose, safe, gentle. Ranger stood stretching and padded over to Chloe. He approached slowly, head low, tail wagging just enough to be reassuring. Chloe stared at him. Then, after a long, trembling moment, she reached out, her small hand vanishing in Ranger's thick fur. She clung to him like a lifeline, burying her face against his shoulder, silent tears soaking into his coat. Ranger nuzzled her, licking her ear, a soft, low whine in his throat. Maddie swallowed hard, her own eyes stinging. She saw herself in Chloe, in her need to hold on to something solid, something that wouldn't leave. For a long time, she just watched, letting the dog do what she could not. Eventually, Chloe looked up. Her eyes, red and raw, met Maddie's. Maddie forced herself to smile, small and honest. "You're safe here," she said softly. "No one can hurt you." Chloe's lower lip trembled. For a moment, she said nothing, but then, so quietly Maddie almost didn't hear, she whispered, "Can I stay with Ranger?" Maddie's breath caught. That was trust, however fragile. She nodded. "Of course you can. He's yours as much as mine." Chloe smiled then, a flicker, quick and nervous, but real. She leaned closer to Ranger, arms wrapped around his neck. For the first time, Maddie saw a spark of hope in her eyes. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. Maddie made soup and toast, set them on the table but didn't press Chloe to eat. Instead, she left the food nearby, watched as Ranger nudged Chloe toward it, watched the girl eat with tentative bites, eyes always wary, always drifting back to the dog for reassurance. Maddie stayed nearby but never too close, learning to wait, to give Chloe the time and space she needed. Outside, the sun broke through, sending shafts of golden light across the snow. Maddie bundled herself up and shoveled a path to the woodpile. She heard a small laugh from inside, the first real sound from Chloe all day. Peeking through the frosted window, she saw Ranger and Chloe sprawled on the rug, Chloe tracing her fingers over the dog's ear, giggling when he flopped onto his back and demanded a belly rub. Something unknotted in Maddie's chest. For just a heartbeat, it felt like a home again, not a fortress. As evening settled, Maddie pulled out the old guitar she hadn't touched in years. She sat by the fire, strumming soft, halting chords. Chloe watched, eyes wide. After a while, she picked up a pencil and her notebook, sketching quietly, drawing Ranger, then Maddie, all three of them together, safe in a circle of firelight. Maddie watched her, a sense of awe and grief tangled together. She realized she was learning too, how to let someone in, how to build trust from almost nothing. That night, Maddie tucked Chloe and Ranger into the bed by the fire and sat up late, journaling by candlelight. She wrote about fear and hope, about the way healing sneaks in between the cracks when you least expect it. She promised herself, promised her sister, wherever she was, that she'd keep Chloe safe no matter what it took. As the fire burned low, Maddie looked at the sleeping forms on the floor and allowed herself for the first time in years to believe in second chances. The next morning dawned bright, sunlight blazing through the frost-rimmed windows, making everything inside the cabin seem sharper, more real, more exposed. Maddie woke to the sound of Ranger's tail thumping softly on the floor and Chloe's gentle snore. For a few precious seconds, there was peace. Then the anxiety returned, creeping in on the edge of the light. She found herself watching Chloe, curled beside Ranger, hair wild, cheeks flushed with sleep. Maddie's thoughts ran in tight, uneasy circles. She'd promised to protect Chloe, but the responsibility felt immense, a tidal wave threatening to pull her under. She kept replaying the images from Chloe's notebook, the flashes of pain and neglect, the scribbled words, "Don't let them find me," echoing louder in the quiet morning. After breakfast, Maddie began sorting through the pile of things that had arrived with Chloe. Most were too big, a jacket that once belonged to another child, shoes that pinched, a backpack stained with marker and tears. Maddie unzipped the bag, intent on cleaning it, when her hand brushed against something wedged in a side pocket, a small, sealed envelope, brittle at the edges. She froze. Her name was written on the front in her sister's hurried script. Maddie's breath caught as she turned it over, fingers trembling. She'd spent years trying not to think about her sister's last months, about all the things left unsaid between them. With shaking hands, she broke the seal. The letter was short, scrawled in blue ink, words pressed hard into the page. "Maddie, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep Chloe safe anymore. Please, if anything happens, take care of her. She's scared, but she's brave too. She just needs someone who won't give up on her. Don't let her be alone in this world. Love you. Always, Jen." Maddie read it twice, her eyes stinging, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the page. Regret surged, sharp and sour. She remembered late-night phone calls, her sister's voice tight with worry, Maddie brushing off the signs that something was wrong. She remembered every missed chance to help, every moment she'd been too buried in her own pain to see someone else's. Before she could lose herself completely, a sharp knock rattled the front door. Ranger shot to his feet, head low, eyes wary. Chloe startled awake, fear flickering instantly across her face. She pressed close to Ranger, making herself small. Maddie stepped carefully to the door, drawing in a steadying breath before pulling it open. "Hank Porter," the man said with a crooked grin, holding up a steaming thermos. He was Maddie's nearest neighbor, if you could call 5 miles near. Hank looked like he'd been carved from mountain stone. Grizzled beard, sun-leathered skin, and a kindness that showed up more in what he did than what he said. "Thought you might want some real coffee and maybe some soup for your guest," Hank said, eyes flicking briefly to Chloe, then away. "Storm left half the town snowed in, but I figured you'd manage." Chloe shrank back, hiding behind Ranger, who stood protectively between her and Hank. The dog didn't growl, but his whole body was a warning, no closer. Maddie accepted the soup, warmth seeping into her hands. "Thanks, Hank. You didn't have to." Hank shrugged. "Never know who needs help, Maddie. You doing okay?" She hesitated. Normally she'd have lied, thrown up walls. But something about the letter had shifted her. She gestured to the table. "Can you stay a minute?" Hank came in, making himself small, voice soft. Maddie found herself opening up, haltingly at first, about her sister, about Chloe, about the things that haunted her in the dark. The battlefield, the guilt, the gnawing fear that she'd never be enough. Hank listened, cradling his mug, eyes kind. "Maddie, I know what it's like to be broken," he said quietly. "But broken people, hell, we know where the cracks are. That's why we make the best protectors." Chloe, still wary, drew pictures as they talked. She sketched Ranger's big paws and gentle eyes, Maddie's messy bun, Hank's scruffy beard. Maddie watched, hope flickering as Chloe's lines grew steadier, braver. Each drawing was a tiny window, Into Chloe's fears, yes, but also into her slow return to trust. Later, as the sun slanted gold through the windows, Hank stood to leave. "You ever need help, you call," he said, voice gentle but firm. "And Maddie, don't forget, you're not alone in this." When the door closed, the silence pressed in again. Maddie returned to the kitchen, the letter still trembling in her hand. She pressed it to her heart, feeling its weight, love and regret mixed together. That night, after Chloe fell asleep beside Ranger, Maddie reread the letter. She wept quietly, shoulders shaking, not caring if anyone heard. She let herself remember her sister as she'd been before everything went wrong, fierce, funny, stubborn, and kind. Maddie promised herself, that she wouldn't fail Chloe, no matter what it cost. Before she turned in, Maddie peeked at Chloe's drawings. The latest showed 3 figures by the fire, Chloe, Ranger, and Maddie, all linked together, the shadows pushed to the edge of the page. For the first time, hope didn't feel so fragile. In the deepest part of the night, Maddie tucked the letter under her pillow, and Ranger, sensing her tears, hopped up on the bed and rested his big head on her lap. Maddie stroked his fur, whispering thanks. The 3 of them, wounded, wary, but together, had started something new. The past would always echo, but the future was still unwritten. By the end of that week, Maddie's cabin felt almost like a real home. She and Chloe had settled into fragile routines, pancakes in the morning, schoolwork and sketching at the kitchen table, Ranger always nearby, sprawling in sunbeams or watching the yard for deer. Sometimes Chloe even ventured outside, bundled up, throwing snowballs for Ranger while Maddie shoveled the walkway. There were moments, tiny, golden moments, when laughter bubbled up, unforced and bright, and Maddie let herself believe things might finally be okay. But peace never lasts forever. It was mid-afternoon when Maddie heard the car. Tires crunched through the snow, an engine idled outside the fence. Ranger growled low, rising to his feet, ears forward and alert. Chloe froze mid-doodle, the color draining from her face. Maddie moved to the window and saw a county sheriff's SUV pulling up behind a battered sedan. 2 people climbed out, one in a crisp blue uniform, the other with a clipboard and a pinched expression. Maddie's pulse leapt. A social worker. She knew the type, cautious, overworked, and rarely the bearer of good news. She crouched beside Chloe. "Listen, sweetheart, I have to talk to some people outside. Stay with Ranger, okay? He'll keep you safe." Chloe's eyes were wide, haunted. She nodded, curling her fingers into Ranger's fur as Maddie slipped on her boots and stepped out into the blinding white. The social worker introduced herself as Tara Evans. With her was Officer Jenkins, his badge gleaming. "We received an anonymous tip regarding a minor in your custody," Tara began, voice clipped but not unkind. "We need to ask you some questions about Chloe." Before Maddie could respond, 2 more figures stormed up the path. Linda and Greg, Chloe's relatives by marriage. Maddie recognized them from old photos Jen had sent years ago, back when everyone still pretended to be a family. Linda's eyes blazed with righteous anger. Greg, heavy-set and red-faced, looked ready for a fight. "There she is," Linda shrieked, pointing at Maddie. "She kidnapped Chloe. She's not fit to care for her. She's unstable. The girl is unstable too," Greg chimed in, loud and threatening. "You're gonna regret this, Harper. Chloe belongs with us, not some basket case and her mutt." The social worker raised her hand. "Let's stay calm," Tara said, her eyes flicking from Maddie to the furious couple. "We just want to make sure Chloe is safe." Inside the cabin, Chloe could hear the shouting. She started to bolt for the back door, fear driving her, but Ranger blocked her path. He stood firm, tail low, herding her gently back toward the kitchen. Chloe pressed against the counter, fighting tears. Maddie stepped between Linda and the front door, every inch of her military bearing returning. "No one's taking her anywhere without a court order," she said, voice trembling but firm. "Chloe is safe here. You left her in that storm. I found her nearly frozen." "That's a lie," Linda snapped. "She ran away because she's disturbed. She makes things up, draws terrible pictures. Greg leaned in, face red. "We'll have you arrested for kidnapping." Maddie forced herself to stay steady. She turned to Tara, pressing the battered notebook and her sister's letter into the social worker's hands. "You need to see this. My sister asked me to care for Chloe. And those drawings, they show what Chloe's been through. She's not unstable, she's scared." Tara flipped through the notebook, her brow furrowing as she saw the images. The woman screaming, the words of fear and loneliness, Chloe's silent cries for help. She read the letter, lips tight. Linda and Greg pressed their case, their voices growing louder, their accusations uglier. They threatened lawsuits, screamed about parental rights, but Maddie refused to back down. Chloe, watching through a crack in the door, cowered behind Ranger, her small hands clutching his fur so tightly her knuckles whitened. Ranger stood like a sentry, every muscle tense, eyes locked on the confrontation. Officer Jenkins glanced at Tara. "We'll need to bring this before the county judge," he said quietly. Linda, triumphant, sneered at Maddie. "Enjoy your last night with her. We'll be back." When the officials left, Maddie collapsed into the nearest chair, tears of rage and fear prickling her eyes. Chloe crept out from behind the counter, Ranger at her side, and stared at Maddie with hollow eyes. "I don't want to go back," Chloe whispered. Please don't let them take me." Maddie gathered her into her arms, holding her close, Ranger wedging his big body between them and the door. "I won't, I promise," Maddie said fiercely, her whole body trembling. "They'll have to go through me, and through Ranger, before they get to you." For a long time, none of them spoke. Chloe's tears soaked Maddie's shirt, and Ranger pressed his head into Maddie's lap, seeking reassurance for himself too. That night, Maddie barely slept. She sat by the fire, the letter from her sister clutched tight in her hand, replaying every moment, every word, over and over. She could still see Linda's venom, Greg's fists clenched, Tara's concerned eyes. She knew the fight was just beginning and she was scared. But then she looked at Chloe and Ranger, curled together on the rug, clinging to each other in their sleep. And Maddie knew, no matter how hard it got, she wasn't alone in this. In the deepest part of the night, she wrote in her journal, "They may have the law, but I have the truth. And I have them, my family, even if no one else sees it yet." As the snow fell softly outside, Maddie braced herself for the battle ahead. She would not let Chloe slip away. Not now. Not ever. Jackson County Courthouse was an imposing building, all red brick and old stone, set against the blinding white of the Wyoming winter. Maddie gripped Chloe's hand as they climbed the courthouse steps, Ranger heeling close, his service vest zipped tight against the cold. The sky above was so clear it hurt to look at, blue as polished glass, no clouds, no cover. Maddie felt exposed, each step forward heavy with the weight of everything she could lose. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Linda and Greg sat near the front, backs stiff, faces set in matching masks of indignation. Linda's eyes darted to Chloe, then to Maddie, full of barely disguised contempt. Greg glowered, hands clenched into fists in his lap. Tara Evans, the social worker, sat on Maddie's side of the aisle, notebook in her lap, lips pressed together in a tight line. Hank Porter hovered at the back, his hat in his hands, a steady presence in the storm. Judge Weller entered, tall, white-haired, his gaze both sharp and tired. "Let's get to it," he said, voice carrying through the hushed room. The hearing began with the basics: Chloe's age, her parents' deaths, the events leading up to the storm. Linda's attorney painted Maddie as reckless, unfit, a traumatized vet with no experience raising children. Linda and Greg claimed Chloe was troubled, a danger to herself, in need of discipline and structure. Maddie's jaw tightened as she listened, rage and fear warring inside her. She wanted to shout, to make them see the truth, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus on Chloe's small, trembling hand in hers. When it was Maddie's turn, she stood tall, voice low but unwavering. She told the judge about the night of the blizzard, about finding Chloe nearly frozen, about the notebook full of terror and pleas for help. She handed over Jen's letter, her hands shaking but steady. "She's my family," Maddie said. "I promised my sister I'd keep her safe. That's what I intend to do." Tara was called next. She spoke quietly but firmly, outlining the inconsistencies in Linda and Greg's statements, the neglectful conditions in their home, the concern raised by Chloe's drawings and testimony. "Chloe's needs are best met with someone who puts her safety and emotional well-being first," she said, meeting the judge's eyes. Hank's testimony was the turning point. He walked to the stand in his worn boots, voice gravelly but sure. "I've lived next to Maddie for 3 years," he began. "Seen her struggle with her own scars, sure, but I've also seen her fight for that girl with everything she's got, Linda and Greg." He shot them a hard look. "I've heard the shouting from their house, seen the bruises Chloe tries to hide. That kid deserves better." The courtroom fell silent. Maddie blinked back tears. She hadn't known Hank had witnessed so much. Greg was called to the stand. At first he repeated the same lines. Chloe was disobedient, ungrateful, lied to get attention. But under questioning, his composure began to crack. Judge Weller's voice was gentle but relentless. "Did you ever lose your temper, Mr. Branson?" Greg's jaw flexed. "Everybody loses their temper sometimes. Did you ever lay a hand on Chloe?" Greg's eyes darted. "She exaggerates. Kids these days, they—" Judge Weller's expression turned to steel. "Answer the question." Greg's bravado crumbled. "Maybe once or twice," he muttered. She wouldn't listen. "Sometimes you have to." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Maddie squeezed Chloe's hand, heart racing. During the lunch recess, Linda tried to approach Chloe in the hallway. She leaned down, voice saccharine, but her eyes cold. "You'll come home with us soon, Chloe. No more running away, do you hear me?" Ranger intervened. He stepped between Chloe and Linda, his body rigid, hackles raised. He didn't growl, not at first, but his stare was enough. Linda tried to push past, hissing, "You're just a dog. Get out of the way." Ranger bared his teeth, a deep guttural growl rising from his chest. For the first time, Linda retreated, face pale. Maddie pulled Chloe close, whispering, "She can't hurt you anymore. I promise." Back in the courtroom, the judge called Chloe to the stand. She clung to Ranger's leash, the big shepherd pressed against her side. Judge Weller's tone was gentle. "Chloe, do you want to tell me what you want?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. "I want a home where no one yells, and I want Ranger and Maddie." The courtroom was silent, every eye on Chloe, so small, so fragile, but unbroken. Maddie felt a surge of pride and heartbreak so fierce it nearly knocked her breath away. Linda tried to interrupt, but Judge Weller held up his hand. "That's enough. I've heard all I need for today. We'll reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments and my ruling." As everyone began to file out, Ranger stayed by Chloe, steadfast and immovable. Linda glared at Maddie, spitting, "This isn't over." Maddie's shoulders sagged with relief and dread. She hugged Chloe, tears in her eyes, whispering, "You were so brave. I'm proud of you." That night, back at the cabin, Maddie sat awake by the fire, Ranger at her feet, Chloe sleeping in the next room. The battle wasn't finished. But for the first time, Maddie allowed herself a fragile hope that the truth and love might actually win. The drive back to the cabin from court was nearly silent. Chloe stared out the window, arms wrapped around her backpack, face pale with exhaustion. Maddie kept glancing at her in the rear view, worried by how small and tense she looked even with Ranger pressed close in the back seat. Snow flurries whipped through the fading daylight, and the whole world felt suspended, the future hanging by a thread. By the time they got home, the sun was setting, throwing long shadows across the frosted yard. Maddie made a simple dinner, but Chloe barely touched her food. Even Ranger seemed subdued, lying under the table with his chin on his paws, eyes tracking every move Chloe made. Maddie's chest ached with the pressure of all the things she couldn't say. How much she wished she could promise everything would be okay. How helpless she felt knowing there were no guarantees. After dinner, Chloe disappeared to her room. Maddie heard the creak of the floorboards as the girl paced, then the soft thud as she curled up in bed, drawing her knees to her chest. Ranger hovered uncertainly, wanting to follow, torn between Maddie and Chloe. In the end, he went to Chloe, settling quietly on the rug by her bed, a silent, steadfast shadow. It was deep into the night when Maddie was jolted awake by a frantic scratching at her door. She hurried down the hall, heart hammering. Ranger whined as she opened the door, then staggered inside, his usual boundless energy gone, his steps uneven. He slumped at Maddie's feet, panting, tongue lolling out, his entire body trembling. "Ranger!" Maddie dropped to her knees, hands flying over his body, searching for injuries. He didn't yelp, but he seemed spent, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. Chloe appeared in the hallway, eyes wide with terror. "What's wrong with him?" she cried, kneeling beside Maddie. Maddie took a shaky breath, forcing her medic's training to kick in. "He's exhausted. He hasn't rested properly in days. He's been so worried about you." She stroked Ranger's ears, fighting the flood of memories, of nights in field hospitals, of comrades slipping away, of the helplessness that came from loving someone you couldn't save. Chloe pressed her face into Ranger's side, sobbing openly. "Don't go, Ranger, please. Don't leave me. You found me. Don't leave me yet." Maddie wrapped an arm around Chloe, holding her and Ranger both. She reached for her emergency kit, checking Ranger's pulse, listening to his breathing, giving him water and small bites of food. He licked her hand, tail thumping weakly, eyes never leaving Chloe. The hours crawled by. Maddie and Chloe stayed on the floor with Ranger, whispering words of encouragement, coaxing him to drink, to rest. Chloe refused to leave his side. She buried her face in his fur, whispering secrets Maddie couldn't hear, promises of forever if only he'd stay. Maddie wept quietly, her own fear nearly overwhelming her. She pressed her cheek to Ranger's flank, praying for strength, for all of them. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Ranger stirred. He lifted his head, blinking slowly, then stretched out, resting his muzzle on Chloe's lap. Chloe gave a shaky laugh, her hands trembling as she stroked his ears. "He's going to be okay, right?" she whispered, looking up at Maddie with desperate hope. Maddie nodded, her own tears streaming freely. "He's the toughest dog I know. He just needs rest, and so do you." Chloe curled up beside Ranger, finally letting herself sleep, her breathing slow and even for the first time in days. Maddie sat beside them, watching the fire, letting the exhaustion settle into her bones. She thought of all Ranger had given, his strength, his comfort, his loyalty, and how much that loyalty had cost him. Later that morning, Hank arrived, bringing fresh eggs and bread. He took one look at the scene, Chloe asleep on the rug, Ranger draped across her legs, Maddie bleary-eyed but relieved, and nodded quietly. "You got yourself a family here, Maddie," Hank said softly. "Don't let the world take that away." Maddie managed a grateful smile. "I don't plan to." As the day wore on, Ranger's strength returned bit by bit. He limped when he walked, tired but alert, tail wagging every time Chloe came near. Chloe never strayed far, hovering at his side, whispering stories and secrets, drawing pictures of him with her colored pencils. But the night's ordeal had left a mark on everyone. Maddie felt the cracks in her armor widening. She was terrified of losing Ranger, terrified of failing Chloe, terrified that love would not be enough to keep them together. But as she watched the two of them, girl and dog bound together by something wordless and deep, she understood. Ranger's loyalty was a lesson in itself. Even when it hurt, even when it cost him dearly, he had chosen to stay. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Chloe crept into Maddie's room, Ranger shuffling in behind her. Chloe climbed into Maddie's lap, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Thank you for not giving up," Chloe whispered. "On me, on Ranger, on all of us." Maddie held her close, Ranger's head heavy in her lap. She realized then that loyalty wasn't just about standing guard. It was about holding on when it would be easier to let go, about loving even when you're afraid. As darkness fell, Maddie whispered a promise into the fire. "We'll face tomorrow together, no matter what comes." And with Ranger's steady heartbeat and Chloe's quiet breathing beside her, Maddie finally believed it might be true. The day of the final court hearing dawned cold and impossibly clear. Maddie awoke before sunrise, nerves buzzing, and found Chloe already awake, curled beside Ranger on the living room rug. The dog's breathing was slow but steady, his head resting on Chloe's outstretched arm. Maddie paused to watch them, girl and dog so close that their dreams seemed to overlap, each drawing strength from the other. Maddie knelt, brushing a stray lock of hair from Chloe's forehead. "Ready for today?" she whispered. Chloe nodded, her face pale but determined. "As long as Ranger comes too." "Of course," Maddie replied, voice gentle. "He wouldn't have it any other way." They dressed carefully, Maddie choosing her old army blazer, Chloe in a simple dress with tights and a thick cardigan. She pinned a blue ribbon, Chloe's favorite, into the girl's hair. Ranger wore his service vest, the ID tags jangling softly as he rose to his feet, ready for whatever the day would bring. The courthouse was quieter this time. Hank met them at the door, a reassuring presence. Tara Evans, the social worker, gave Maddie a nod, holding her file close, eyes calm but resolute. Linda and Greg stood with their lawyer, both stiff with anticipation, Linda's lips pressed into a thin, angry line. Judge Weller entered, gaze sweeping the room. He looked tired but unflinching. "Let's hear closing statements," he said. Maddie's hands trembled as she stood. She unfolded the letter from her sister, paper worn soft from so many readings. Her voice caught, but she forced herself onward, reading aloud Jen's plea, that Chloe be protected, that she never be left alone, that someone fight for her when she couldn't fight for herself. "I made a promise," Maddie finished, her voice breaking. "Not just to my sister, but to Chloe. I promised her a safe place, a real family." I intend to keep that promise no matter what it takes. Linda's lawyer argued that Maddie was unfit, traumatized, unstable, a risk to the child. Linda spoke, voice shrill, blaming Chloe for running away, insisting the girl needed discipline, not coddling. Greg, silent and sullen, refused to look at anyone. Then it was Chloe's turn. She stood before the judge, Ranger sitting at her side, his head nearly level with her small hands. "Chloe," Judge Weller said, voice gentle, "what do you want to say?" Chloe's eyes shone with unshed tears, but her voice was clear. "I want a home where no one yells, where Ranger can sleep on my bed and Maddie makes pancakes on Sundays. I want to feel safe. I want to be loved." The judge studied her, the entire courtroom holding its breath. Tara stepped forward. "Your Honor, Chloe has thrived in Maddie's care. Her grades are improving. She's drawing and laughing again. She's made tremendous progress, and that's because she finally feels safe." There was a long silence. Maddie squeezed Chloe's shoulder, bracing herself for anything. Judge Weller looked at Linda and Greg. "You two will attend counseling. You are not to contact Chloe until further review. Maddie Harper, you are granted legal custody." His gaze softened as he looked at Chloe. "Welcome home, Chloe Harper." The courtroom erupted, Linda wailing, Greg cursing under his breath. Maddie barely heard them. She was on her knees, Chloe in her arms, both of them crying. Ranger barked once, tail thumping so hard against the wooden bench that even the judge smiled. Outside, sunlight dazzled off the courthouse steps. Hank whooped, lifting Chloe into the air while Maddie laughed and wiped away tears. Tara hugged Maddie, whispering, "You did it." Chloe clung to Maddie, squeezing her so tightly it hurt. "Is it real?" "Can we really stay?" "It's real, kiddo," Maddie whispered back, voice thick with emotion. "We're home." Ranger limped a little on the way to the truck, but he held his head high, tail wagging. Chloe walked beside him, hand tangled in his fur. Maddie watched the two of them, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief. That evening, the three of them, Maddie, Chloe, and Ranger, celebrated with pancakes for dinner. Chloe made a crown for Ranger out of construction paper and crayons, and he wore it with dignified patience, letting Chloe feed him bites under the table. Hank joined them for dessert, bringing ice cream and laughter. As dusk settled, Maddie sat on the porch, Chloe curled against her side, Ranger sprawled at their feet. The mountains blushed pink and gold in the fading light. For the first time, Maddie let herself believe the future might be more than just surviving. It could be beautiful. Chloe pulled her star student certificate from her backpack and pinned it to the fridge, grinning with pride. Maddie blinked back tears, realizing just how much the little girl had changed. There was light in her eyes now, confidence in her step, laughter waiting just beneath the surface. Ranger nuzzled Maddie's hand, as if to say, "We made it." She buried her fingers in his fur, heart aching with love and gratitude. The three of them sat together as the sky deepened to indigo, each of them changed, healed in ways both small and large by the storms they'd survived. That night, Chloe fell asleep with Ranger at her side and Maddie reading stories by candlelight. There was peace in the cabin, warm and fragile, and Maddie knew it had been hard-won. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, but for tonight, there was only the quiet comfort of family and the promise of second chances. In the weeks after the judge's ruling, the Harper cabin changed in ways Maddie never expected. Outside, the Wyoming winter thawed into muddy March, but the real change was inside, quiet, slow, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Maddie, Chloe, and Ranger fell into a new rhythm. Mornings full of sunlight and the smell of strong coffee, afternoons filled with homework and Ranger's clumsy attempts to catch snowflakes on his nose. At night, they gathered around the fireplace, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, letting the crackle and pop of burning wood fill the spaces words couldn't reach. But even as peace settled around them, echoes of the storm remained. Healing, Maddie discovered, wasn't something that happened all at once. It came in layers, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes sharp and aching. There were nights when Chloe startled awake from nightmares, her cries piercing the dark. Maddie would be there in seconds, gathering Chloe in her arms, murmuring words she wished someone had said to her long ago. Sometimes Maddie's own dreams betrayed her, memories of gunfire, of doors she couldn't open, of her sister's voice calling from some unreachable place. She'd wake with her heart pounding, sweat chilling her skin, and always Ranger would be there, his great head resting on her knees, his silent presence anchoring her to the present. Small things could still trigger Chloe, a slammed door, a raised voice on TV, even the clatter of a dropped pan. Maddie learned to move gently, to speak softly, to let Chloe come to her own comfort in her own time. They created rituals of safety, a secret handshake, pancakes on Saturdays, Ranger sleeping at the foot of Chloe's bed every night. Maddie began journaling again, filling page after page with thoughts she'd kept locked away for years. She wrote about her fears, about the ache of losing her sister, about the guilt she carried like a stone in her chest. But she also wrote about Chloe's laugh when Ranger rolled in the snow, the way sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, the hope that flickered in the space between them. One afternoon, while Maddie folded laundry, she found Chloe quietly sketching by the window. The girl looked up, face uncertain. "I drew something for you," she said, holding out a piece of paper. Maddie took it, heart twisting. It was a picture, 3 figures standing together under a stormy sky, but they were holding hands, facing a break in the clouds where the sun poured through. Maddie looked at Chloe, who bit her lip, waiting for a reaction. "It's us," Chloe whispered. "You, me, and Ranger. We're safe now, even when it rains." Maddie's eyes stung. She pulled Chloe close, whispering, "You're so brave." And so loved. Later that week, as Maddie organized Jen's old belongings, she found a photo buried at the bottom of a trunk, her sister holding a baby Chloe, both smiling, pure joy radiating from their faces. On the back, Jen had scribbled, "For Maddie, if anything happens, please be her safe place." Maddie sat with the photo, the weight of it nearly crushing her and yet strangely freeing her at the same time. She realized she could never erase the past, the mistakes, the missed opportunities, but she could honor her sister's trust by choosing every day to show up for Chloe, to be the safe place she'd promised to be. Chloe found comfort in art and in Ranger's company. She began to laugh more easily, to dance through the kitchen when her favorite song came on, to ask for help with math problems or offer to make tea for Maddie after a long day. She pinned her drawings on the fridge and gave one to Hank every time he visited. The more she trusted, the more she blossomed. For Maddie, healing also came from letting others in. She let Hank fix the old fence, accepted Tara's invitations for coffee, joined a small group for local veterans, sharing her story bit by bit. She found that helping Chloe helped her too. It gave her a sense of purpose that went deeper than any uniform ever could. Through it all, Ranger was the silent glue holding them together. He aged quickly now, his muzzle graying, his movements a little slower. But every morning he greeted Chloe at the door, tail wagging, eyes bright. Every night, he curled between Maddie and Chloe during story time, breathing slow and deep, as if reminding them both that some kinds of loyalty never break. One evening, Maddie and Chloe sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, Ranger lying across their feet. The sky was purple, the first stars peeking through. "Do you ever miss the way things were?" Chloe asked softly. Maddie thought for a long moment. "Sometimes. But I think I'd rather remember what we have now, and all the storms we've survived." Chloe nodded, snuggling closer. "I'm glad we're together." "So am I," Maddie whispered, tucking Chloe's hair behind her ear. As spring crept in, Maddie wrote a letter to Jen, pouring out all the words she'd never said. She promised to break the cycle of fear, to choose hope, to keep believing in second chances. She folded the letter and placed it on her nightstand, a daily reminder of how far they'd come. And as the days grew longer, Maddie realized the truth. Healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but learning how to live with it, how to let it make you braver, kinder, more open to love. With Chloe's hand in hers and Ranger's steady presence at her side, Maddie felt, for the first time in years, truly at home. Spring arrived in the mountains with a gentle stubbornness. The snow melted from the cabin's roof in heavy, rhythmic drips, and the river beside Maddie's land thundered with new life. Maddie stood on the porch most mornings with Ranger at her feet, and Chloe tucked beside her, watching as the whole valley seemed to bloom with second chances. Their home felt transformed. More than just a safe place now, it was a new beginning. But Maddie and Chloe both sensed something more was possible, some way to share the refuge they'd fought so hard to build. The idea took root one night at the dinner table as Chloe read aloud from a book about rescue dogs and foster families. Maddie looked at Ranger, graying but watchful, and saw in him the heart of what they'd all survived: loyalty, patience, forgiveness. "Do you think we could help other kids?" Chloe asked, twirling a pencil in her fingers. "And maybe some dogs too?" Maddie smiled, the thought taking hold. With Hank's help and Tara's encouragement, they started small, weekend visits from foster children and battered rescue pups. At first, the kids were shy, haunted by things they'd never say out loud. The dogs cowered or barked, uncertain if this new place was safe, but slowly, together, they made space for trust. They called it Ranger's Refuge. The name was Chloe's idea, a tribute to the dog who had saved them all. Every Saturday, the cabin filled with the chaos of young voices and happy barks. Maddie taught the children how to build a fire, how to listen for coyotes at dusk, how to let a dog approach first and earn your trust. Chloe became the unofficial ambassador, guiding newcomers through the woods, showing them how to paint, whispering encouragement into frightened ears. One afternoon, a boy named Mikey sat on the porch steps with a battered puppy in his lap. He asked Maddie, "Do you think things can really get better, even for someone like me?" Maddie knelt beside him, Ranger resting his head on her knee. "I know they can," she answered. "It's not about forgetting what hurt you. It's about choosing every day to let something good in, even just a little." That night, as the kids toasted marshmallows by the fire, Maddie thought about how far she, Chloe, and Ranger had come. The story wasn't just theirs anymore. It had grown, rippling outward. Every laugh, every gentle hand, every moment of courage became a new stone laid in the foundation of a future she once thought she'd never have. As the refuge grew, Maddie was often invited to share her story at local schools, veterans meetings, even on the radio. She always started the same way, her voice honest, unvarnished. "I used to think family was something you were born into. Now I know it's something you build, moment by moment, with the people and sometimes the animals who choose to stay." She'd tell the truth about trauma, that it doesn't just go away, that healing isn't about erasing the pain but learning to live with it, letting it change you without defining you. She spoke about her sister's letter, the weight of promises kept and broken, the way Ranger's quiet loyalty taught her that showing up every day, even when it's hard, matters more than anything. Sometimes after her talks, people would approach her in tears, telling their own stories of loss and survival. Maddie always listened, always reminded them, you don't have to be perfect to be someone's safe place. You just have to be there. Chloe, too, found her voice. She started a scrapbook at the refuge, a living record of every child and dog who came through their door. On the first page was a drawing, 3 figures beneath a stormy sky, hands clasped, Ranger in the center, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Maddie kept her sister's photo on the mantel and her letter in a frame on her nightstand. Every night as she turned off the lights, she whispered a silent promise, "I'll keep building this family, one sunrise at a time." Ranger slowed with age, but he never stopped greeting new arrivals at the cabin. He lay on the porch, letting kids braid his fur, snuffling the hands of frightened puppies. His calm, a living example that trust can be rebuilt, even after the worst storms. On the first anniversary of the court ruling, Maddie gathered everyone, kids, neighbors, volunteers, around a bonfire. The night was clear, the mountains a deep blue silhouette. She raised her mug and spoke from her heart. "If you're here tonight, it means you survived something. It means you kept going, even when it hurt. That's what Ranger taught us. You don't have to be unbroken to be brave. You just have to stay." She looked at Chloe, who grinned back, cheeks flushed with hope. Maddie's voice carried in the quiet, settling over everyone like a promise. "If our story moved you, remember, each of us can be someone's safe place. You don't have to start big. Foster an animal, volunteer at a shelter, check on a neighbor, offer a hand to someone who's lost their way, believe in second chances, not just for others, but for yourself, too." As the fire burned low and the stars shimmered overhead, Maddie sat between Chloe and Ranger, listening to laughter echo across the yard. The wounds of the past would always be there, but now they were woven into something stronger, a family, imperfect and beautiful, built from love and courage and the quiet miracle of not giving up. And with that, the story closed not on an ending, but on a beginning. Ranger's Refuge, a living legacy of healing and hope, a beacon for anyone still searching for shelter after the storm.